16.3 Sexual reproduction in plants. Don't forget to go back to the objectives after you're done studying to make sure that you studied the lesson carefully. Okay, so this is the flower. The flower is the reproductive organ of the plant. It is where reproduction happens in the plant. Let's take a look quickly on the parts of the flower. Our first part here, these are the petals. These are the colorful parts that attract pollinators. We will learn later what are pollinators. And here we have the sepal. The sepal is the green part that looks like a leaf that's under the flower. Actually, before the flower blooms, it's covered with the sepal. It's to protect it until it's ready to bloom. And down you have the petiole. The petiole is the part of the stem that holds the flower upright. And then you have the nectary. The nectary contains the nectar that gives the flower its smell, and also it's made of carbohydrates, and it attracts also pollinators. They come to eat the nectar inside the nectary. Now you have the stamen. The stamen, these are the male organs of the flower. The stamen is made of the anther and the filament. The anther contains the pollen grains, while the filament, it supports the anther and keeps it upright. Now you have the female part of the flower, which is the carpel. The carpel consists of 3 parts: the stigma, the style, and the ovary. The stigma, this is the sticky part on top, while the style, this is the channel that connects the stigma to the ovary. And inside the ovary, we have the ovule. The ovule is the part that contains the female gamete of the plant. So now let's take a look quickly on some of the plant structures too. So the part of the plant that keeps the plant standing upright, and it is the organ that supports the plant and contains all the support and transport tissues. It is the stem. And the part that is colorful to attract insects that act as pollinators, because they will carry the pollen grains from the male to the female. These are the petals. While the part of the plant that contains chlorophyll and responsible for photosynthesis, of course, the leaves. The part that anchors the plant to the ground and makes sure that enough minerals and water are absorbed, this is the root. The small green parts that allow the unopened flower to be protected and covers it before it blooms, these are the sepals. And the male part of the flower, it is the stamen. It contains the anther and the filament. Now, the female part is the stigma? No, it's the carpel. The carpel contains the stigma, the style, and the ovary. What is so special about the stigma is that it's sticky and it allows the landing and the sticking of the pollen grains on it to allow fertilization, which we will take in details. Okay, which part produces the female sex cells in the ovules? It is the ovary. Okay, so let's take a deeper look into the female parts. It is called the carpel. So the whole female part again is called the carpel. Consists of the stigma, style, and ovary. So sometimes, like in the previous flower, the style was long, but here the style is short. So the ovary holds the ovules. Again, the ovules, they contain the female gametes. And also, after fertilization, those ovules will turn into the seeds, and accordingly, the ovary will turn into the fruit. Okay, style. What's the style? Again, it is the channel that connects the stigma to the ovary. Stigma, it is the sticky part. It's the top of the carpel. It is the one responsible for catching the pollen grains. Now, what about the male parts? The male parts are called the stamen. They are made up of the anther and the filament. The anther, it's the part that contains the pollen grains, while the filament, it is the one that keeps the anther standing upright. The anther contains the pollen sacs. Usually they are 4 pollen sacs. The pollens should be protected with a coat. Why? Because they are going to travel to the female. So they will pass through a lot of different situations. They can be destroyed, they can be eaten, so they have to be protected. So again, pollen grains have different shapes and they are surrounded by a coat to protect them from the different environmental conditions while they are traveling from the male to the female. So when the pollen grain lands on the stigma, now did it reach the ovule yet? No, it did not. The ovule is deep inside the ovary. So therefore a pollen tube will be formed from the pollen grain and it will travel through the stigma until it reaches the ovule, where the male gamete will join the female gamete for fertilization. So fertilization again is when the male gamete nucleus joins the female gamete nucleus. How does the pollen travel? It travels by pollination. So pollination is the transfer of the pollen grain from the anther to the stigma, from the male to the female. Pollination can be cross-pollination, which means that the anther will be on one flower or one plant and the stigma will be on another plant. And it can be self-pollination if both male and female parts belong to the same flower. So if the flower contains both male and female, sometimes it will be self-pollinated and sometimes it will be cross-pollinated. If the pollen traveled from the same flower anther to the same flower's stigma, this means that this is self-pollination. But if it travels from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower on another plant, this is cross-pollination. There are 2 ways for pollination, either insect pollination or wind pollination. These are the most common ways. These are not the only 2 ways, of course, but these are the most common ways of pollination and the most natural ways of pollination. So if it's insect pollination, this means that the insect is the one, or the pollinator is the one responsible for the pollination. So the insect will carry the pollen from one flower to another, and it will brush itself against the anther to take the pollen grains, and then it will brush itself against the stigma to drop the pollen grains. Why does the insect do so? It does so without knowing that it's doing it. It does it because it enters the flower to reach for the nectar in the nectary at the bottom of the flower. So it brushes itself while pushing itself to reach the nectar. While in wind-pollinated flowers, those flowers don't need to attract pollinators. So as you see, they don't have any petals, or maybe they have very small petals. Now you don't see the stigma and the anther in the middle and deep inside the flower as you see here. No, you see them dangling in the air in order to drop the pollens and to catch, and the stigma to catch the pollens. So they are clear in the air in order to catch them. Also, even the pollen grains are different. So let's go take a look into the differences between them. So insect pollinated flowers and wind pollinated flowers. In insect pollinated flowers, you need them to have a strong scent to attract pollinators. While in wind pollinated flowers, they don't need the scent. They are pollinated by the normal wind blowing. In insect pollinated flowers, they are large and conspicuous. Why do they need conspicuous petals? Because they need those petals to attract the pollinators. So they are large with clear guidelines. While in wind pollinated flowers, you have small inconspicuous petals or no petals at all. Insect pollinated flowers have nectaries at the base of the petals. Why? To make the scent and in order to have the carbohydrates that the insects come to eat, while wind-pollinated flowers don't contain nectaries because they don't need to attract any insects. Also, insect-pollinated flowers' pollens are sticky or spiky to get attached to the insect, while the wind-pollinated flowers are light and smooth, so they are blown easily in the wind. Anther and stigma here are inside of the flower because the insect will definitely pass through them to reach the nectar, and it's going to brush itself against them while reaching for the nectary. While the anthers and the stigmas in the wind-pollinated flowers, they dangle outside the flower where they catch the wind. And also the stigmas are feathery in order to catch the pollen grains easily from the air. Both flowers make a large number of pollens because pollens can be eaten, or they can be lost, or they can be delivered to the wrong flower. Also, sometimes due to wind pollination, they can be blown away and lost. So that's why a large number of pollen grains should be produced by each flower. So what's a seed? The seed is the structure that forms from the ovule itself after fertilization. It contains the embryo, which is the zygote when it went through some mitosis, which is the cell division, and grown a little bit, but it's not a fully grown plant yet. It's just the embryo, the baby of the plant. And what's the zygote? It is just after the fertilization, just after the fusion, the one cell formed is called the zygote. And after some mitosis, after some cell division, it forms the embryo of the plant inside of the seed. What's a dormant seed then? A dormant seed, these are the seeds that can survive harsh conditions, such as what? Such as drought and cold. How does it happen? It happens when the seed has little water, so it becomes dry and dehydrated. It turns into a dormant seed. Or when there are no metabolic reactions taking place inside of the seed. So what will happen? Can you just plant this seed and it will grow normally? Actually, no. This seed is a special type of seed that needs some treatment before you plant it or before you disperse it. So what's seed dispersal? It is the transport of the seed away from the parent plant to start its own germination, to start its own life. So now this seed is the baby of the plant. You want it to become a big individual responsible for itself. So why do we need to do seed dispersal? First, to help the plants colonize new areas, to be present in new areas, and also to help the plant get more space to grow. If it's just growing side by side to its original plant, it will not get enough space for itself. Also to reduce competition for the resources, like what? Like water, minerals, anything present in the soil. When you take the seed and disperse it in a new soil, it gets its own resources without competing with the original plant. And then after the seed is dispersed, you get germination. What happens during germination? The seed coat will break and the embryo of the seed will start to grow and develop the new plant. Now, are there conditions that help seed germination? Of course. First, temperature. Suitable temperature is a must for the seed to germinate. Why? To allow the enzymes to work, because as we said, enzymes will not work if it's too hot or too cold. So, if the enzymes are denatured, the seed might be killed. Also, water is very important. Why? Because we said that for germination to happen, the seed coat has to burst or has to be cut to allow the growth of the plant. So this happens because of water. The water will swell the seed so that the coat will burst. Also, it breaks down the storage compounds that act as food for this plant until it's fully grown and capable of photosynthesis. It allows the metabolic reactions. Metabolic reactions are all the chemical reactions that keep the organism alive, if you remember. They activate the enzymes and hormones. So the presence of water molecules. Also, water is needed for the activation of enzymes and hormones, because hormones and enzymes are very important for all of the metabolic processes. Finally, oxygen. Oxygen is very important for aerobic respiration because growth is a process that needs a lot of energy. Without oxygen, no energy will be produced. Finally, let's take a look at the anatomy of a germinating seed and the functions of each part of this seed. First, we have the testa. The testa is the hard coat. Watch the color coding. Each scientific term has the same color as its definition. So the testa is the hard seed coat. It's what bursts in order for germination to happen. And then you have the cotyledon. The cotyledon here is the food storage because the seed is still underground. This plant is still incapable of photosynthesis. That's why there is food already stored in the seed in the cotyledon. And then you have the radicle. The radicle is the embryo root or the root of the baby that after the testa gets broken, it will go down and go dig deeper into the soil to become the root of the plant. And we have the plumule. The plumule is the embryo shoot. So the plumule is the embryo shoot, which means that it is the part of the seed that will later grow up and become the shoot of the plant. So, let's answer some questions together. The diagram shows 4 flasks which were set up to investigate the conditions needed for germination. In which experiment will the seeds germinate most quickly? The answer is C, but why? Because now the temperature is proper, it's 18 degrees Celsius. Also the cotton is damp, which makes sure that there is water. And also here I have this straw that will enter air inside, which will provide oxygen. Therefore, you have the proper amount of water and you have the seeds placed on something resembling a soil, and you have proper temperature, and finally you have oxygen. So why are the others not okay? Because this one is a dry cotton, so you don't have water. This one has boiled water, which means that the temperature is not proper, and also it's too much water. The seeds are soaked in water. They don't just have access to water, and here you don't have a proper temperature. Okay, which combination of structural features is found in a wind-pollinated flower? It is D. It has no petals, anthers are outside, and no nectaries. Because no petals, because this flower does not need to attract pollinators. Anthers outside to allow the wind to blow away the pollens, and no nectaries because again no need to attract any pollinators. Next question. Again, the diagram shows an experiment on germination. Groups of test tubes were set up as shown. The groups were placed in different conditions. Dry cotton and then seeds. Here you have wet cotton and seeds, and here you have wet cotton with seeds, deoxygenated water, which means that this is water that was deprived or oxygen was removed from it, and you have oil, which will prevent the entry of any air. Which table shows the results? So let's take a look. The answer is A. Why? Because in the dark, one will not germinate anyway because the cotton is dry, and 2, it's gonna germinate because it has everything, and 3 will not germinate because even the water is deoxygenated, so no oxygen. In the light, the same will happen. Why? Because light is not one of the conditions that affect germination anyway. So either dark or light, this does not make a difference. And this is the tricky part in this question. Light or darkness does not affect germination. So here you need to have a look or look closer or make sure that the conditions needed for proper germination are here, which are oxygen, proper temperature, and air. Now, the diagram shows a flower. Which process have taken place? Pollination or fertilization? What do you think happened here? It is pollination. Why not fertilization yet? Because the pollen tube did not reach the ovule yet. You see, pollination happened, the pollen grain is already on the stigma, and the pollen tube has formed, but it did not reach the ovule yet. So this means that no fertilization has taken place yet. Okay, paper 3 questions. Figure 8.1 shows a section through a pea flower. Name the parts labeled A and B. So what's A and what's A and B? A is the ovule and B here is the sepal. It's pointing out here, so this is the sepal and A is the ovule. The flower is insect pollinated. Define the term pollination. Pollination, again, is the transfer of a pollen grain from the anther to the stigma, from the male to the female. Suggest how parts C, D, and E work together to bring about insect pollination in the flower. So C is the petal. It's bright in color and it attracts the pollinator. D is the stigma. It is sticky, so when the insect brushes itself against it, it deposits the pollen on it. And E is the anther. The anther is where the insect picks up the pollen. Suggest how wind-pollinated flower would be different from the flower shown. Please use the table that we explained earlier to differentiate between wind-pollinated and insect-pollinated flowers. After both pollination and fertilization have happened, a flower produces seeds. The seed can germinate and grow into new plants. For germination to happen, number of environmental factors must be present, including oxygen, suitable temperature, and water. Explain why each of these factors are essential for germination. Oxygen is needed for, yes, aerobic respiration, suitable temperature for the enzymes, and finally, water, so the testa can break and germination can start, for the activation of hormones and enzymes, and all the conditions we mentioned earlier. You can choose any one of them. Thank you, and I hope this video helps you study.